What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are checking out the new TECNO Phantom V Fold2. Now, longtime followers of the channel might know that I don't generally cover foldables, mainly because they're very pricey. Those checks that some of you think Samsung sends me to promote their phones obviously aren't enough to afford their foldables. But TECNO is hoping to introduce their foldables to more customers with a price point that's more in line with regular expensive smartphones, and they aren't sacrificing much to do that. In fact, this new V Fold 2 has some upgrades over the original Fold, including an improved, more durable design, double the storage, bigger battery, and better cameras, all while keeping the price around $1,100, which I totally realize isn't cheap, but considering the price point of some other foldable phones, this one certainly has the potential to be folding in more people's hands. So I'm going to fill you in on everything you need to know about TECNO's new Phantom V Fold 2. We'll talk about its foldability, practicality, what's improved of course, but first things first, let's see what all comes inside the box when you buy one. Now, TECNO has once again partnered with LOEWE for the design and color scheme of this phone. They've used them in the past on some other devices, and as we slide off the sleeve and pull off the lid, the first thing you get is the phone itself. There are still some warnings and general care instructions printed front and center there for this foldable. And as far as the included accessories, well, you get everything. There's a 12-month TECNO warranty card, as well as an included 2-piece hard plastic case with a kickstand. There's your VIP NFC card for support and info about your new phone. And TECNO also tosses in their 70-watt wall plug. One thing that's new this year on the V Fold 2 is faster charging, and TECNO absolutely wants you to know that and actually use it. There's also a SIM card tool and a USB-A to USB-C cable. So like I said, you get everything and then some with this phone, which is very nice. With all that stuff out of the way, here is the phone itself. And as we peel off the final bit of wrapping and attempt to get rid of those unsightly stickers, let me talk briefly about pricing and availability. Now, the V Fold 2 is technically being launched globally, but it's obviously not a US phone. However, for most everyone else in the world, you'll probably find this phone for sale for $1,099, or between 70 and 80,000 rupees, or like 830-ish British pounds. So yeah, quite a bit cheaper than the more well-known flagship foldables. And this year, TECNO seems to only be offering one configuration option, but it's twice as much as last year's base model, 512 gigabytes of storage with 12 gigabytes of RAM, so a decent bit of space. Now, there is one more thing you do get when you buy this phone, the Phantom V Pen. It's a full-size stylus that is made for this phone. It also comes with its own little carrying case thing that you can stick on to something, and an extra pen tip if you wear it out. The pen doesn't have a dedicated slot on the phone itself. It's far too big for that. But considering obviously the big folding screen and the price point and everything, a super nice stylus like this to pair with this phone makes a lot of sense. So the overall size and dimensions of the V Fold 2 are pretty similar to the original. The front display is a 6.42-inch sort of elongated semi-skinny screen with a decent screen-to-body ratio. You'll see one of two selfie cameras there, and I think for something you'll use maybe 40 to 50% of the time, this is a good size, good ratio, and the actual form factor of the phone, especially its thinness, makes using the outer display a pretty comfortable experience, even one-handed. Around back, you can see that I got the blue color scheme of this phone, and you might also notice the textured leather-like cover. This is something I'm a big fan of on smartphones. It gives off a premium vibe, it's grippy, you don't get any fingerprints. I think it's the perfect pairing for this phone especially. One obvious change over last year is that camera module. This is a big old camera hump with lots of lenses and sensors and the LOEWE logo. It makes up like 30% of the rear of this phone. I don't know that I love the design choice, but I understand with phones like these nowadays, they really want to try and highlight that camera setup. Folding the phone open, the big main screen here is the same sized 7.85-inch flexible foldable display with a slightly better 88.2% screen-to-body ratio. You have pretty even black borders all around that are fairly standard on foldables like this with a large, flexible main screen. I don't know that TECNO did anything specific here as far as changing or upgrading the screen technology, but durability-wise, the phone is now IP54 dust and splash resistant, which pertains obviously to the whole phone, but with a particular emphasis on the hinge and the other moving bits. Durability is always a question with foldables, so I'm glad to see TECNO taking the necessary steps to make the phone tougher to the elements. The sides and edges of the phone are a polished chrome aluminum, and like I mentioned a moment ago, this is a phone that to me feels particularly thin when it's folded up. It looks thinner than two smartphones sandwiched on top of each other, honestly. It closes nearly flat, and surprisingly, it's also like 50 grams lighter than last year's phone. So in the hand, whether it's folded or unfolded, it should be a lot easier to use and manage. On the right side, you'll find the volume buttons and the power button, which doubles as your fingerprint sensor. No issues at all there with setting it up or using it to unlock. Up at the top, there's one of two Dolby Atmos speakers, along with your SIM card tray. Just pay attention to which hole you poke because there is a mic hole right above that. But the phone supports dual SIM. Unfortunately, no eSIM, it doesn't seem, and no micro SD card support here either. The 512 gigs of storage, like I mentioned, is nice though, but TECNO is getting into the habit now of pre-installing a ton of apps onto their phones. Fortunately, a lot can be deleted, but it is a little annoying. At the bottom, you'll see probably the largest main loudspeaker I've come across, just above the USB-C port. There's a second selfie camera above the right side on the folding display. The other selfie camera is on that outer display like you saw, and around back, 3 big camera lenses and a whole lot more to the setup, which I'll talk about in a moment. So as far as those displays, the outer one is the same LTPO AMOLED as last year, the 120Hz adaptive refresh rate, 1080 resolution, packing in around 431 pixels per inch, but it does seem to offer a higher peak brightness now of some 1600 nits. There's really nothing here I would change at all. And in fact, I find myself using this outer display a lot simply because it's big, it's bold, it's bright. It would be just as good on its own, honestly. And the thing about foldable phones is that with certain things that rely on a certain aspect ratio, having a more normal-ish secondary outer display to utilize can be helpful. Now, that's not to say that I don't enjoy the big, nearly 8-inch main folding display either. This is an even better LTPO 120Hz AMOLED screen with a higher resolution, 2296 by 2000, and getting to watch content on this or do some side-by-side app scrolling or anything else really is something. With a screen this big, you have a lot of ways to utilize it. And while I've always felt that awkward aspect ratio was sometimes a net negative when you just want to watch regular 16:9 content, the overall viewing experience is still bigger. And even though this is a flexible foldable display, we're at a point now where the physicalities of that aren't completely detrimental. It is still that plasticky feeling display with a decent bit of glare, but it's still a solid viewing experience with not that noticeable of a crease. And most importantly, the folding aspect didn't cause TECNO to compromise on anything spec-wise. Really, both the outer display and the larger folding display have all the aspects and elements I look for in a smartphone screen, folding or not. And considering this is the same double viewing experience with great specs you'd otherwise pay $500 or $1,000 more for, this is a darn good screen setup for the price. Also, like I showed you at the start, this year, the V Fold2 is made for a stylus. The Phantom V Pen itself is a big pen-sized stylus that comes with the phone, and while some people may not necessarily like something so big, I think it actually makes sense. The screen is big, the phone is big, the pen matches that, and I don't think it was ever the intention to have a built-in stylus for this phone, so TECNO seems to have just decided to make the stylus as large and comfortable to use as possible. It charges via USB-C and it's Bluetooth. It actually connects to the phone, so your writing and drawing experience is as good as can be. It has that hover feature where the phone recognizes the pen hovering just over the screen, and your writing and drawing experience has about as little lag as possible so that it feels like you're writing accurately. This isn't a stylus-specific phone necessarily, but it's a phone that has a great stylus experience. And it could be a stylus-specific phone, depending on what apps you like to use with it. And I think this pairing really enhances the overall value of the V Fold 2 this year. By the way, the out loud listening experience with this phone is great too. The dual speakers on the top and bottom are huge. I mean, the phone itself is big too, obviously, but you get a very clear, very loud sound coming from both ends. So one of the ways in which TECNO, I think, was able to keep costs down for the V Fold 2 this year is by simply reusing last year's internals. The phone is powered by the same MediaTek Dimensity 9000 Plus processor as the previous V Fold last year, and aside from doubling the storage, you don't get much of a performance boost. Here are the updated Geekbench scores for that chip. Now, this MediaTek processor is like a flagship adjacent component that was originally introduced in 2022. And I don't generally have much negative to say about MediaTek as a whole. I like the fact that their products are utilized by certain brands to cut costs without totally sacrificing performance. And like I've said a bunch of times now, if that's what kept this phone in the $1,000 price range and will allow more people to experience a folding phone because of it, that's great. But TECNO is kind of walking a fine line now where the intended customer for a phone like this is still probably one who cares a lot about specs. And seeing a 2-year-old MediaTek processor in a 4-figure smartphone might not be that enticing to those buyers. Still, this is a phone that has enough oomph to get the job done, even if you want to push this phone hard with some side-by-side multitasking or gaming. Arguably, smartphones aren't that much more powerful than they were even a couple of years ago, and the people who need top-tier 2024 performance are probably a small percentage of buyers. I'm actually more concerned with TECNO's half-hearted commitment to seemingly just 2 major Android updates for this phone. I mean, it's still a pricey device after all. It's supposed to be one of their most innovative flagship products, and I think they should reward early adopters with some long-term support if they invested a decent chunk of change buying this thing. I also don't personally hate TECNO's iOS as a whole. I think it's a little quirky, some mix between Xiaomi and iOS with random useless elements like whatever their home feed is supposed to be, but there's still a lot to like about the phone. The big screen, foldable experience it offers. I just wonder if the spec sheet is steering some potential buyers away when really that older MediaTek processor is probably what saves you a lot of money here. Where TECNO did make some major improvements is with the battery and charging. Even though this phone is slim and lightweight, TECNO shoved a bigger 5750 mAh battery inside here somewhere, and they brought 70-watt wired charging speeds, which is crazy fast. That'll get you to 100% in well under an hour for sure. And they even added 15-watt wireless charging. It's not like last year's phone had bad slow charging at all, but TECNO upping their power game here, even when they didn't need to, is pretty cool. Finally, while the camera setup around back physically was changed quite a bit, the core components aren't all that different from last year with one exception. The main camera lens is still a 50 megapixel f1.9 aperture shooter. The secondary lens appears to be the 50 megapixel telephoto from last year as well, but the third lens has been swapped out for something new. It's also now a 50 megapixel lens, still the ultra wide, but obviously beefed up quite a bit from last year's 13 megapixel ultra wide. The outer selfie camera is also upgraded, 32 megapixels to match the 32 inner selfie shooter. And within the camera app, you essentially get the same sort of spread of camera features and functions that you'd otherwise see on most of TECNO's other smartphones. That's not a bad thing though. Capability-wise, this phone has 4K video at up to 60 frames per second, a 50 megapixel photo mode, a super macro mode for up-close shots. Its main camera utilizes TECNO's AI cam technology for better image processing. I think what's most surprising to me is just that while there's nothing here that's an outright negative, it doesn't seem like the hardware changes visually, this new big bulky camera module, really match the actual camera upgrades. Remember, the processor inside this phone isn't any better either. And aside from the software changes or AI enhancements and the better ultra-wide lens, I don't know that this phone is camera focused like most smartphones seem to be nowadays. All in all, the big selling point for the new TECNO Phantom V Fold 2 has got to be the price. For just a little more than $1,000, you can now have a full-size, full-feature foldable and try out what some people are calling the future of smartphones. I'm still uncertain about that personally, but it's nice to see a company like TECNO trying to keep costs down to allow more people to try out a phone like this and decide for themselves if it's worth using. I mean, I know it's still not cheap, but when regular flagships are $1,000 and this foldable is now around $1,000, it suddenly becomes a comparable option and not something that's $500 or $1,000 more expensive than what you'd otherwise spend on a phone. But what do you guys think of the new Phantom V Fold 2? Is it a smartphone you can see yourself unfolding? Do you believe in the future of foldables? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.